Chapter 12. Summertime, summertime, summertime. But first, Friday, July 16th, 2021, 6:22 a.m. Thoughts. One year at my kids' elementary school, they were having a talent show on the last day before summer vacation as a fun way to wind down the school year. The kids would all get very excited for the talent show each year, and there would always be lots of buzz about what they would do for their auditions. A lot of kids would showcase a sampling of their out-of-school activities like dancing, gymnastics, or karate, for example. Some would put together hokey magic acts or little stand-up comedy routines. Some would play an instrument. Many wanted to sing. Kids are so unabashed, so fearless, and so unconcerned and unaware about failure and embarrassment before they become teens. Well, many of them, that is. So the talent show had always been a mix of excruciating and cute, but all in all, a buzzy tradition that really fired everyone up. After sitting through many endearingly groan-worthy numbers, the show concluded with a boy who has autism. His speaking skills were behind his peers, and his motor skills perhaps somewhat too. He was such a sweet, sunshiny kid. I think he was 7 or 8 years old when he rounded out the talent show that year. A popular Justin Timberlake song from an animated film that was out was put on, and that kid simply started dancing. Freestyle dancing. No dance school choreography, just feeling the moment and dancing. He had this beautiful, unfettered momentum and energy, completely, innocently, joyously, unabashed. Parents and kids started clapping along. Kids in the audience started moving as they sat and watched, singing along with the song. And that boy danced. As the cheesy expression goes, he truly danced like no one was watching. There was this magic in the room, this total joy. Sunlight pouring in from the door propped open at the back of the hot gym. There was this building feeling of excitement and that end of school fervor, that fizzy, school's out for the summer vibe, and it was palpable. And all the while, that beautiful kid kept on grooving until every adult forgot their stodgy adultness and surrendered to that feeling of pure childlike enthusiasm and elated anticipation. A total buzz. I have been thinking about that often, especially during this past year when the kids were dismally robbed of joy and especially joyous closure before summer vacation. But regardless, I think of that magical happening often, how that kid just danced, and how a room, for a few minutes, was filled with pure joy. It was one of the highlights of my life. Now, as I was saying, summertime, summertime, summertime. Up until I became a teen, summers were particularly amazing. I think most people could say that, if we're lucky, that is. Sure, when we become tired adults, we maybe tend to look back on all youthful summers with rose-colored glasses and nostalgic fondness. But many have probably forgotten those years between puberty and getting a driver's license of nomadic, aimless, listless boredom. I guess not every day was amazing in summer when I was a kid, but the beautiful thing is, I mostly remember the summers happily. Come June, that last month of school just seems excruciating. You knew summer vacation was right around the corner, but you had to somehow try to maintain focus on that last bit of incredibly boring school to get to it. Not only was school not air-conditioned then, and many, aside from my kids' elementary school, still aren't, which is unbelievable to me. We were not allowed to wear shorts. In grade 8, we begged to be allowed to wear shorts in those last weeks of school. We eventually managed to wear the teachers down, and we were allowed to ditch pants for a couple of weeks, but that was not the norm all the other years. Those last days were long, stuffy, sweaty days. But finally, that magical last day of school would arrive. I picture myself wearing something a bit nicer, like a skirt or summer dress, bursting out of that educational prison into the baking heat with my school bag messily crammed with papers and crap from my desk and locker, and my report card ready to go home in its long envelope, inscribed with a wish from my teacher to have a wonderful summer. freedom! A seemingly endless period lying ahead to be able to sleep in a bit, wear nothing but comfortable clothes, and be outside with dirty bare feet from morning until dark, only coming in for lunch, maybe a snack. When I was little, our yard was your basic backyard-sized yard. There was a long stretch of land that ran the length of about 10 or so houses behind, in between our yards, and a factory that was behind our houses. My maternal grandfather worked in that factory for years, but it closed in the 80s and became a big industrial warehouse for many years, which my mother liked even less than when it was a factory, due to all the big trucks rumbling and clattering around behind our home. Whoever owned that big chunk of empty land sold it off, and Dad and most of the other neighbors agreed to each buy a portion, giving each new owner a nice long extension of yard. One neighbor a house over from us wasn't interested, so our neighbor beside us got to have a great big yard. Dad was always a bit jealous of this, because he often dreamed of having a yard big enough to have his own horse. He had always been very enamored of all movies and shows cowboy related, and a big fan of John Wayne. Before we had a big backyard, we had an above-ground swimming pool in the left corner of the yard. Even from a young age, I felt incredibly fortunate to have a swimming pool, and always felt that any yards that didn't have pools must have been hot, dull suffering for those poor, poolless souls. I mean, what kid doesn't love swimming? I guess there are kids out there who aren't crazy about it, but I have always loved swimming, even if I sucked at swimming lessons. In vague, fuzzy, youthful memories, there were periods of time we didn't have a pool. Those were probably the summers I dreamed of having that little green plastic turtle pool with the built-in slide. Man, I wanted that turtle pool bad, but we didn't just get exciting things back then, so too bad, Karen, no turtle pool for you. Dad would set up the sprinkler on those days, and we could get our bathing suits on and jump over it. It was only a matter of time before a kid jumps on it, though, and cracks it. Brother and I would also be allowed to play with the hose on hot days. I don't know if we had more spectacular water pressure back then, or if we had a very powerful nozzle, but when we took turns with the hose, we had the best time maliciously turning the nozzle to that perfect laser point setting where the water would come out in a tight, straight line, and every now and then you could drill the runner right in the back in a nice, focused, stinging point of pain. We would each die laughing as the victim screamed in agony. Even more fun if you got to drill your brother right in the back of his head while he yelled, "Not in the head! Not in the head!" After we got rid of our original pool, for a little while we had an amazing circle of velvety beach sand, and Brother and I built epic sandcastles there for a while. What we also built were rival megamalls based on our ongoing hit radio/TV show about everyone's favorite long-suffering character, Junior Armpits. So in that great circle of sand, the super mega malls and theme parks of Junior Town and the ultimate competition Smiley Town came to life in the 3D. It felt epic. Sand pits were awesome as long as you didn't run into too many cat turd surprises. It didn't last too long though, because that amazing sand pit got turned into Mom's vegetable garden. To this day, the best carrot ever is the skinny one you've pulled from the ground yourself and washed with the backyard hose. I loved rooting through and sneaking out delicious strawberries in the sun. One time one of the boys from down the street was over playing. I'll call those brothers Bo and Luke, because along with a girl from farther down the street, we used to love to act out a popular Friday night TV show. The girl from down the street always got to be the pretty female character from the show, and I had to pretend to be her cousin from out of town. That kind of sucked. Bo was always very nice, but his younger brother was a bit of a pain. May have been an eyelid flipper, now that I'm thinking about it. He eyed that garden and all the fun things that were growing in it and asked, "Can I have a tomato?" I went and asked Mom, and she was a bit perplexed but said, "Sure." "Ah, yeah," he said with great enthusiasm. He then plucked off a big red tomato and bit straight into it like an apple. Mentally, my jaw dropped. I love tomatoes too, but I never bit straight into one like that. Burned into my brain forever. At some point, we didn't have a garden there, just grass. Perhaps that was when the garden got temporarily moved down into the arid desert that was our new extension of backyard. Mom tried to grow corn down there the first year we got that new land, and it was kind of cool to have our own mini cornfield, but I don't recall it yielding the most delicious corn. When there was no pool and no garden in the top section of the yard, there was this beautiful, magical little corner that for some reason I loved. It was at the top of the rock garden Mom had built on the slope between the top section of yard and the bottom. Dad had planted this little cedar tree there, and it was under a large tree that had already been there for many years. I loved that little cedar tree. It was only about a foot tall, and it seemed to be the perfect scale for my little toy A-frame cottage. I set that little cottage up right beside that little green Christmas tree, and it was like the perfect little mini spot in the woods. I didn't always use the little plastic, armless, legless people that came with the house, but I'd use my own little dolls instead. Whatever narrative I had created to go along with that setting, I feel like it seemed to last for ages, and I was so content out there. When I was about 7 and our house had a new TV room addition, a drafty, freezing TV room, and a new large deck that Dad had built, I used those steps to create Barbie's multi-level apartment. I could be outside there peacefully playing for hours, but by then I had younger girls living next to me on the left, and a slightly bratty younger sister-brother duo living a few doors down on the right, and unfortunately they would want to come over and play. I would grudgingly allow them to join in with one last sad, wistful look at my perfect introvert setup as I allowed them to join in. There were benefits to this, of course, because other kids had other stuff that I didn't have, and someone else's toys were always really interesting. The girls next door had blow-up doll furniture, and this was good because their couch didn't tip over backwards constantly like my little yellow crocheted super stuffed couch. Someone had a Cher doll, which was friggin' awesome, and someone had Donnie and Marie dolls. Cher doll was exciting because she had very long hair, but she was also problematic because her hair constantly got stuck on her bristly eyelashes. I mean, constantly. They also had other doll clothes that I didn't have, and who doesn't love a new wardrobe? One of them had the doll with the flip-top scalp that could be turned to give her a different hair color. On one side it was long brunette hair, and on the other side long blonde hair. I coveted that doll. I find I often come across a repeated message online that says whatever you love to do as a kid is what you should be doing as an adult. I feel like I'm overthinking it. I loved my kick-and-go scooter until the back plastic wheel eroded, rendering it unusable, but I don't necessarily want a scooter now. I don't think they make a scooter with a foot pump propelling mechanism on the back. I loved sitting out in the backyard playing with my dolls and creating little houses, but I don't think there are any companies that are going to pay me to do that. I really loved to make mud pies. I mean, I come back to that memory all the time. I haven't found a way to turn making mud pies into a lucrative dream career. Maybe the answer is to just find a way to be outside more. Outside definitely makes me feel fantastic. Each summer when we're on our beach vacation for the week, I am completely uplifted by all that outdoor time. All that wonderful swimming, being barefoot, endless fresh air. Might need to find a way to bring mud pies back, though. Anyway, it was during a very youthful summer that I seemed to be having a particularly inspired time for art. I had my own bedroom, and it was in the room that became Brother's bedroom and then Dad's office/family computer room. So yeah, I was pretty young. And by art, I mean that I seemed compelled to draw a lot. On things that Mom did not particularly appreciate me drawing on. I don't know. Suddenly I felt like things around the house needed some improving, so I would grab a pen or marker and, well, start improving. I thought my bedroom wall was pretty plain, so I grabbed that pen and started drawing what I wanted to be circles, but which kind of more resembled large potato chips to my mind. An aunt of mine added an addition to my art fervor that I had no memory of. Apparently I tried to draw my face in profile on the pillowcase so it would look like I was always in my bed. Mom equaled not happy. I really crossed the line though one quiet afternoon when Mom was busy doing housework. I remember scrutinizing our gold velvet couch in the good living room. It had flowers stitched into it. It wasn't like those velvet couches that were like a floral painting. No, they were just puffy flowers with stitched outlines. Subtle. I remember thinking they just did not show up enough. Luckily, there was a handy black felt tip marker nearby. So I started outlining. Oh dear, it was not turning out like how it looked in my mind. That snapped me right out of my art trance, and suddenly I was filled with that, oh dear Lord, what have I done? Type of horror. Holy shit, what have I done? I basically thought, minus the swear, because this was before I started going to school and I had yet to come into my grade 1 cursing zenith. At some point, not too long after, Mom was back in proximity, milling about doing her housework. It was right at the moment that I was halfway to my room, trying to creep as quietly as possible up the stairs when I heard, "Karen Christine Corfield!" I felt the blood drain from me. There was no escaping what I'd done. Horrified, I did the only thing I could do. I started crying. My remorse was intense. I couldn't live with myself. Mom was livid. "I'm sorry! I'm sorry!" I wailed. "Sorry doesn't fix it!" Mom said, enraged. Side note, Brother and I agree that we heard "sorry doesn't fix it," or "sorry isn't good enough," or "sorry doesn't make it better" from time to time, and it left us very perplexed. If sorry didn't fix something, what the hell did? It left a great gaping hole of mystery in our lives. Oh no, sorry wouldn't fix it! I knew I had done something very bad, so I wailed louder and began to beg for punishment. I actually pleaded with my mother to spank me. "Spank me! Please spank me, please!" And so she did. One good smack on the bum, and let me tell you, that was the one and only time I ever got spanked because Mom was not into spanking. Well, that did the trick. I had learned my lesson. Until a few days later when I decided that yellow wood 2-tiered coffee table that was super plain needed some jazzing up. Listen, I wasn't an idiot, so this time I used a pencil, and then I started arting. By the time Mom discovered this, not long thereafter, she was beside herself. Thankfully, it came off with a wet cloth. I was confused that she was still that mad, considering the pencil wiped right off that high-gloss varnish. I even tried to point out that it came right off, but no, she was not having it, and this time I would have to be punished. So that night after dinner, the whole family was having a family swim in the pool, and I was forbidden from joining in. I can remember standing on the shitty, dilapidated back porch that we had before Dad tore it down and turned into a new TV room, staring out the glassless window frame, watching everyone seemingly having the time of their lives, and blubbering away as I lived in hot, sweaty, poolless purgatory. Oh, the suffering. Summers were good, though. There was lots of swimming, lots of time to be outdoors, barefoot, tanned, fairly dirty, and happy. Legs and arms loaded with mosquito bites, some of which were scabbed over after they'd been ruthlessly scratched. Maybe some fun after-dinner games of hide-and-seek broadly spread over 2 or 3 yards with neighborhood kids. A jumbled mental slideshow of trips up north with friends of my parents and their kids at the time. In the 70s, when I was small, my parents were friends with a married couple with 3 daughters who slotted into age groups that meshed with Brother and me. They were our neighbors briefly, but stayed friends for a few years after they moved to a new house. Our neighbors on the other side had 4 kids, but mostly I remember Dick and Tommy because they were closest in age to me. As far as those 2 went, I did not like Tommy as much. For one thing, he wasn't as nice as Dick. Dick was quieter, far less pesky, and absolutely dreamy. Also, Tommy loved to flip his eyelids inside out just to bug me, and I found that absolutely repellent. From generation to generation, there is always that one kid who latches onto that little party trick and uses it freely with malicious intent. Not to be sexist and exclude any girl eyelid flippers out there, but from my experience, it's always been boys. My son tried it out for a little while after observing a kid in his class. He practiced a bit, unveiled his new skill to me. I freaked out, and luckily it didn't really progress any further. But I digress. My parents, as I was saying, became particularly good friends for a while with the first couple I mentioned. The mom was very quiet and shy, and the dad was a mustached, free-spirited, absolute life-of-the-party hoot. They loved to party it up, and sometimes the parties went late enough that their girls would get tucked in somewhere in our house to sleep. I thought this was very exciting, these slumber parties, but they weren't precisely slumber parties. They were just very, very late grown-up parties. I thought it was fun when the D's were over. Mom and Dad would put on their favorite double record album, K-Tel Superstar Mega Hits, on that giant stereo and crank up the volume. Dick and Tommy's parents were quieter, but would join in the backyard fun sometimes as well. My dad, like Mr. D, was quite hilarious too, so when they'd both team up after a few drinks, they became an amazing comedic duo by all accounts. The 70s were very social, and people tended to know who all their neighbors were about 5 or 6 houses to the right, to the left, and across the street in both directions from their own home. Now, I know I'm pretty introverted, but I can kinda name the neighbors in 3 houses near mine, tops. Other than that, it's a friendly nod and a hello. The D's came on at least one vacation with us in a day trip a million years ago to an animal safari less than an hour away. You know the kind of place. You drive through an enclosed section in your car at your own risk and hope the wild creatures don't tear strips off your station wagon. You have to keep the windows up for your own safety, even though you're visiting in 1,000-degree summer heat. It's a pretty sweaty day. Because it's the 70s and it's the decade of endless impromptu visiting, for some reason on the drive back from the safari, we stopped in at the furniture store where Mr. D's brother was working. I remember sitting in his messy, cramped little office while the man I'd never met chatted with everyone in his 3-piece suit, politely finishing the large glass of cold milk he'd poured for me from his little office fridge. It may have even been a carpet store. Do kids of today even know what a carpet store is like? Maybe not. Picture a giant, dim, because they always seem kind of dim, dark decor warehouse with giant stacked spools of carpets stretching up vertically in long aisles. Pretty exciting long aisles to run up and down as your parents deliberated ad nauseum over which homely carpet they want to invest in for one room, or maybe for an ambitious wall-to-wall carpet purchase. Somehow a carpet store was less boring than a furniture or appliance store. You can't truly appreciate real boredom until you've been to an appliance store with your parents as they browse washers, or dryers, or fridges, or stoves for an eternity, and you've quickly realized there are no toy sections to save you. So yeah, that trip to visit that store on the way back from the safari got burned into my brain. It really seemed to sum up that super social decade. There was still some visiting in the 80s, but maybe brother and I reached an age where we could exercise our right to stay home. Then they just kind of eventually faded out. I didn't necessarily love the visits, but I loved being with Dad, and in the summer when he would say, "Shorty, want to go for a ride?" I would jump up from my toys with enthusiasm. We'd both hop into whatever car we had at the time, both of us with bare feet sometimes, and Dad would amble down the road, the radio playing fun songs as he drove with 2 feet, a trick I learned from him in later years that kept a little gas flowing while braking when you had a car that loved to stall at every stop sign and traffic light. Over time, we just kind of lost touch with the D's. My parents kept up the friendship for a while, but then Mr. and Mrs. D split up and things just kind of changed after that. I don't really remember what happened to Mr. D then. Maybe he and my parents had a falling out. We kind of kept in touch with Mrs. D, but those visits were never the same. One time she came by after a few years with her youngest daughter who was closest in age to me. Have you ever visited with a kid you used to be friends with, but then you lost touch with them for a few years? And then for some reason you hang out with them again, but it's just weird? They don't dress like you or talk like you. They dress and talk like the kids from their own school, and that's practically like a foreign country. It's different from those kids you had to hang out with from time to time because your parents were visiting their parents. Those kids were always weird. I mean the kids you hung out with when you were all young and goofy, and then you lose touch with them and reconnect in the more precociously judgmental tween years. Very awkward. Well, I shouldn't say weird, but there has to be a word that evokes how monumentally, unrelatably different they feel. That girl died just a couple of years ago. I saw her obituary online. I could still see the girl I knew and the woman's face in the photo. It's always strange, disconcerting, and sad to see an obituary for someone you once knew a long, long time ago. When sister was still 3 and I was 10 and brother was not far off 15, we went on a family road trip to New Hampshire. Mom's best friend lived there with her partner. She left Canada at some point and had a job working for a local, independent, artsy, highbrow newspaper in Derry. It was an all-day drive to get there, and what stays in my mind most about the whole trip is that long, rambling drive through those winding American highways, and hearing a few key songs that were hugely popular that summer on the radio. Long before the days of handy GPSs and smartphones, it was going to be one person at the wheel and one person to check the maps as you went. Before the trip, you'd stop into your local tourism office, get all the maps you needed for your trip, open those maps up on the kitchen table, and plot your course. Mom was far too afraid to ever drive on any highway, so it was always going to be Dad. This was fine because Dad loved a good long drive or road trip. Brother must have inherited this love. I stopped liking long drives after Mom died. It was during those awful early days that Brother tried his best to distract our completely emotionally demolished father with endless long drives. I think the day we drove over 2 hours along rural highways to go for lunch and then ambled back the even longer way, trapped in the car that long with my fellow heartbroken siblings and our wrecked, silent dad, trying to act cheerful for that long, did me in on long drives pretty much forever, but I digress. Somewhere in the dark, along one of those American roads, we got lost trying to find that last piece of the route to Mom's friend. It was very dark and felt very late. We were all tired, and Dad was definitely getting tired of driving that day. His knee on his gas pedal leg would start to ache if he was behind the wheel for a very long time. There was a certain point in those last dark hours of our drive that Dad second-guessed himself and took the wrong exit. The exit lane was one way and heading off into the unknown. This is when Dad completely freaked Mom out. He stopped heading down that lane, checked there was no one else around, and made an executive decision. Threw the car into reverse and rocketed backward from the off lane and back onto the highway. Mom nearly lost her mind with horror, but Dad was not going to head down a route that could have put us very far off course. Mom was very vocal and let Dad have it. She was, understandably, super mad that Dad had done something so reckless. Dad looked at it all pragmatically and firmly insisted that he was not putting all our lives in danger and that he saw that no one else was coming. They had a bit of a fight, and it was all rather stressful. Eventually, we either took another wrong turn or just could not find our road in the dark. New Hampshire and Vermont are very foresty to me in my memories. It's like the roads are cut right through the woods in many parts. The nights seem very black, with wide-spaced road lights. Brother and I were probably concocting some very melodramatic scenarios of hopelessness and doom in our minds. A gas station miraculously appeared. We pulled in. Dad disappeared into the little store. Would there be someone there who could help us find our way? Would we be lost forever? Did we take a wrong turn so far from Mom's friend that we'd never find our way there ever? Would we have to sleep in the car? The suspense was unbearable. Dad emerged, and with him, a man. They were talking and nodding, and then Dad got back in the car. The man knew the way. The man knew how to find the road we needed. He hopped onto his motorcycle and started to pull slowly away. Dad started the car and followed. I can picture that man riding ahead of us on his motorcycle, illuminated on the dark road by our headlights. We followed him for a little while, and then his arms stretched over to point the way to the exit we needed. We went right and honked our gratitude. The man stretched a hand into the air and continued off straight on his road into the night. Man, I get choked up every time I think of that guy. And so we finally arrived just around midnight to Mom's friend Benny's. She and her boyfriend had been worried about us since we were a fair bit later than we were supposed to arrive. My siblings and I sat on her couch in her bright, cheerful living room, feeling very shy and very worn out. Benny offered a plate filled with homemade toffee with chocolate drizzled over it to us. We found our rooms not too long after and tried to sleep in our nice but unfamiliar surroundings. Benny was an offbeat kind of woman, very intellectual, very artsy and free-spirited, bohemian. She had long brown hair that she swirled up into a kind of who-gives-a-shit poof on top of her head. She wasn't interested in getting married, and she wasn't interested in having kids. She was a confident career woman. It was a fascinating contrast to my own mother, who was also very intellectual, but mostly nervous to drive anywhere, and stayed home to take care of all of us. They both still seemed in sync though, chatting, enjoying coffee, smoking together. Benny's house was a big 2-story home with woods in her backyard and a little stream running through. She had an enormous cat named Bear, who she let walk all over the tables and counters. When he came by, that is. You didn't see too much of Bear. He seemed to stop in every now and then just to say hi or to have a little something to eat, and then he was immediately drawn back to the wild paradise right outside his door, where he could probably hunt and pillage and cause cat mayhem to his little heart's content. Behind the house there was an old yellow school bus parked and seemingly abandoned. The inside of the bus had been converted into living quarters because Benny and Bert had had some free, nomadic years traveling the open roads, and that bus was their home for a period of time. I don't remember a great deal about that trip, just bits and pieces of events, like how my little white blonde sister, whose talking lagged behind others in her age group, called Benny Lady. The adults thought this was a hoot, especially Benny. Benny was also pleasantly surprised by my siblings and I. We were very quiet, polite kids, and she remarked upon how nice we were. I think she'd prepared herself for the worst. One day we all took a day trip into Boston. It was very gray, hot, and humid that day. I had this floral satin sleeveless dress that I'd brought on vacation, and that was the day I insisted on wearing it. I had been quietly admiring of Benny's chic, effortless style. She chose to wear a summer sundress that day, and I thought that was awesome. Mom never wore a dress just for the hell of wearing a dress. I wanted to get in on that glamour. So I was firm that I needed to wear my dress. Mom was very opposed to this. It would be hot and uncomfortable. It wouldn't be the best choice for all the walking we'd be doing. What if it got dirty? Etc., etc., and on and on. I mean, on one hand, Mom had an opinion on anything we were trying to choose to do. On the other hand, she was often right, damn it. Like any time she'd say we'd need a sweater or a warmer coat and we ignored her, it always ended with profound inner regret. That dress was unbreathably hot, and 10 was pretty much my chubbiest kid year, and that dress was tight around the top band and strangling my sweaty, chubsy little armpits. I summoned all my power not to let it slip that I was frigging uncomfortable in that dress. There's a photo somewhere in one of our many albums that Dad must have snapped right after Mom had gotten pissed at me, Mom looking grouchy and me looking pretty sulky in my lovely, torturously hot dress. We took a tour through a colonial ship that was docked. As a kid, I never appreciated anything historical. Anything with velvet ropes keeping you from looking in certain rooms was boring as fuck to me back then. I'm the total opposite now. I absolutely love going on historical house tours. So 10-year-old sweatbag dress Karen wasn't particularly impressed by this historical boat. It was hot, kind of cramped, and fairly claustrophobic, and quite boring. Dad was loving it, though. He was thrilled with the short beds and always marveled over how short people apparently were back then. One day we went for a trip up the mountains to see the Old Man of the Mountain, which was a natural formation of cliff ledges that appeared to form an enormous profile of a face. The other part of that trip involved swimming in a mountain stream. Mom didn't super enjoy this because the water was very fast moving and the rocky bottom was very slick. That water was ice cold. There were lots of other people enjoying that stream, and we were all having a nice time until the cops showed up and told us all to beat it. And that's the end of the film reel for that trip. It was soon enough that we were back in the station wagon, hearing those songs that would be burned into my brain forever, and feeling like the summer was slipping through my fingers. The end of that trip felt like the start of the countdown to the first day of school. These were some of the last trips Brother came on with us for many years, until we'd all go for a vacation together as adults. It's too bad. As a kid, you have no foresight in these things and get so immersed in the moment. Maybe we still struggle with that as adults to a certain extent. We're often told to appreciate every moment because they don't last and life is always moving quickly and relentlessly forward. But when you're young, you feel like you have infinite time and maybe, instead of appreciating that you're walking through Boston, all you're thinking about is that it's hot and you're bored and you wish you were at home swimming in your pool. Funny. I had a friend in my early elementary school years who said one year that we were lucky we got to go on summer trips. She, her single mother, and her siblings had never gone anywhere. I was stunned by this. I thought that everyone went on a trip every summer like we did, where it was a longer road trip, or a trip to the zoo, or Canada's Wonderland. I thought that everybody knew about up north, but that wasn't the case. Not everyone had the money, or a dad who loved to head out on the highway to the great unknown. I was very lucky indeed. I think that was the trip where we came home fairly late in the evening to find our house was overrun with fleas. Very exciting thing to return home to. That trip was toward the end of summer, and I don't know if I can truly convey just how listless and morose August feels. I guess if you know, you know. All my life here we've had 2 months off for summer before the next school year starts, July and August. July had, and still has, a vibrancy to it, an excitement, a crackling feeling of joy and anticipation, a fizzy, buzzy, cocktail-like feeling that there are so many weeks of party weather and outdoor fun stretching out before you, a feeling of relief that the good weather is finally here, a time to shrug off all those fusty, restrictive, cold-weather clothes. Hell, all you have to do when you want to go out is slide into your flip-flops or sandals. You can hear backyard parties up and down the street. You can feel the happiness. August is the opposite. The sun has started to go down earlier again. The shadows on the pavement are longer and just different. There is a whole different slant to the light. The grass and flowers have become tired from relentless heat. You can almost feel the trees getting ready to go back to sleep. It's quiet. The odd car drives by, and other than that, all you seem to hear in the last days of August is the reedy drone of crickets. People are no longer enthralled with the summer heat. Instead, you start to hear excited talk for wearing sweaters again, drinking hot chocolate, and being so ready for autumn. I start to see posts online about Halloween, and those have been coming earlier and earlier each year. Seriously, are we this impatient for what's next? I'm really trying not to be. The older you get, the more you become aware of just how quickly time is passing by. I'm trying to hold on to it.